This is an interview with Chu Prey from Microsoft Research, conducted by Barbara Boucher Owens. This interview is being recorded on the 15th of July, 2007 in Bellevue, Washington, the United States. It's part of the Computer Educators Oral History Project. Did I get your name right?
Yes.
Good. Okay. We're going to start way back when. When we start these things, we start back. Did either of your parents have college degrees?
Yes. Both my parents had college degrees. My father was a lawyer for the Chinese nationalist government, and my mother was an accountant.
So that kind of leads into a little bit of the next question, which is, did either of them have interest in math or science? And so it sounds like accounting.
Not really, but what they did do was, when we came to the United States, and they knew that language was always going to be a deficiency for them, and they believed in order for their children to be successful, the only common language was science and math. And so that's what we did, because they could help us with that.
When did they come?
I was 6 weeks old, 1948. 1949, fall of 1949.
Then were you a good student?
Yes. I was the stereotypic good Chinese girl student until I went to college, and then I had a good time. So it was one of those where you always did your homework, you always did what you were supposed to do. We always did what we were expected to do.
Did you take classes in the math and sciences in high school?
We used to have our own workbooks at home. My father would go to, whatever was the equivalent of Borders back then, and he would go buy workbooks, math workbooks, and my brother and I would have to do 1 or 2 pages a day when we were in school before we could go out and do anything after school. So that was our after-school homework. And then during the summer, we had chapters to do, so that we were always doing math things.
Well, so you said you did have a brother. Did
Yes.
he go on to college? And
Yes, he's a medical doctor with a master's in epidemiology, which is statistical kind of studies.
So did they encourage you equally?
No. Well, they expected him to be a medical doctor. That was the model. They would like to have had me do that, but money was always short. And so I kind of figured out early that it was better for him to be the medical doctor because he was the boy. And so I went into math, and then I ended up in biology. But then somebody told my parents that computers were a good thing to do, so I started taking some computer courses, and that's how I got into computing to begin with.
What were your parents doing in the States? Were they still having accounting and...
My father was a diplomat with the nationalist Chinese government, but when I was in 6th grade, they had transferred him back to China, to Taiwan, and since my brother and I did not read Chinese, he and my mom made the decision to stay in the United States. And so he quit his job and went back to school and got a master's in mechanical engineering.
Well, then you answer that question a little bit differently, because now we're back into the sciences with your dad in mechanical engineering.
But my dad, it was not natural for him. I mean, my mom has reflected the recent years that it was very difficult for my dad. It was not something that came naturally to him. Mathematics was not easy for him. But he just sat there and he did it and he did it and he did it until he got it. I mean, it was one of those where they believed in drill and practice. So, and that's how he got through. It was not because he thought it was something he was interested in particularly or that he was good at, but he knew he could get a job.
Then reflect on your math that you were doing.
Oh, I think it's one of those things where when you start doing it when you're little, you don't know any different. So my brother and I have always been pretty good at math. I mean, it's not that it's so easy, but it's not something we're afraid of. And so when it came time to do hard things in math, we just did it. It was just something we knew we should do. And I think a lot of that is because of my father's insistence that we do all these extra math things during the summers and during the school years, and he just believed mathematics was the way to keep us competitive if we were going to live in the United States.
Well, how did you then, were there any teachers that were particularly influential when you were in high school or elementary school? Shaped some of the decisions you made?
Not really. My parents were very hands-on when it came to our education. Not so much with the teachers, but what they thought they could do themselves that we should be doing on our own. So our vacations were very much going to the museums. We never went to, I think I was probably in 8th grade before I ever went to a professional baseball game or any activity like that. We would go to the ballet. My father would take us to the ballet, but he would never take us to, a sporting event or a popular concert or any, that was just not what we spent money on. But the ballet, he would buy tickets to take us to the ballet. If we were going to the movies, it was never, I don't remember going to the movies when I was a child, except for, I can remember once my dad took us to see a Disney movie. But he didn't even go in because it was too expensive. He took us in and sat us down, and then he left, and then he came back to get us because all they could afford were those 2 tickets.
Wow. Well, how did you choose then your undergraduate institution since your parents were hands-on?
They were very good about that part of it. Education was not a matter of money. My brother graduated from Georgetown Medical School, which is a private institution, debt-free as a medical doctor. Think about that. It was an incredible amount of money. But my parents, education is not to be dealt with by dollars. It's to be dealt with because you can do it. And when I got my PhD late in life.
But let's talk about down at the beginning.
But at the beginning, my father came to me and said he wanted to pay for my PhD, even though I had already been married and had 3 children by this point. And I said, well, fortunately I had gotten a fellowship, but he said, well, we paid for your brother. We should be paying for you. This is our responsibility. But it worked out that we didn't need to. My husband was actually kind of embarrassed that my father would want to pay for. He said, well, we can afford to pay for you. But it was one of those where, that was their belief that education was a parent's responsibility regardless of when that education happened. A very different model.
So how did you go about choosing an institution, your undergraduate institution?
Well, back then, the Chinese family coalitions that were talking about all of us going to college and whatever, our support system families that we would get together and talk about things. And there was always a discussion of what schools were better, what schools were best, where you should go, And it got to living in the Midwest, there was no reason not to go to a state school. Back then, they were still very good, already very good. And so the price was so much cheaper.
Where were you living?
In Illinois. I did my undergraduate work at Illinois, Urbana. And so, my parents had said I could go to Northwestern. It was a private school. It would have cost a lot more. But, I could have gone anywhere I could get into was basically what my parents told me. And they would worry about the money, which is really quite a gift. So.
When you got there, did you know what you were going to major in?
No. Well, I was a math major. I started out in math. And I probably should have stayed in math, except that I was having too much fun. And so math was hard. You had to spend time doing it. Other things were more fun and easier to do. And so that's what I did. I changed out of math because I could do other things that were easier.
So what did you do?
I did biology. So it ended up that I was taking all these lab science courses because I liked them, and I just stopped taking math, which was a shame.
Did you know what attracted you to biology? Were there teachers were there friends that were in your classes?
Fit into my schedule. At a big school, you got what you got. So it was really happenstance. So it wasn't any lightning that said, oh, this is just fascinating.
So you finished in 4 years?
Yep.
With a biology major?
Yep.
Okay. And your choices are in front of you. What kinds of things were you thinking about, and who was helping shape those choices?
Well, it was interesting because it didn't occur to me that you can't really get a very good job without an advanced degree in biology, and most biology people were pre-meds, which I had thought about for a while, and then I knew I didn't have the grades for. Plus, my parents wouldn't have the money to send both my brother and me to medical school at the same time.
Was your brother younger? Or
1 year. He's right behind me. So, we were both in college at the same 3 years together, and then we would have both been in. I knew that couldn't happen. So I actually toyed around with physical therapy for a little bit. I thought about that, decided, I didn't really want to do that. So I did what was natural, and I went back to school and went in math. And so in essence, I made up all the courses that I would have taken as a math major and then did graduate work in math. But I never finished that because I got married. I was working and never finished. So it was one of those where I sort of regret not finishing, but I have all my math background, and that's when I started taking computing courses.
In graduate school?
In graduate school.
And this was and where was this?
Back in Chicago. So, and I was working at an engineering firm. And so it was a really easy transition because once you started back then when you started taking any kind of computing courses, they would put you in jobs that required some kind of computing understanding. And that just kept me going. I thought, this is pretty interesting. We'll just keep going here. And working part-time, I was the company's first software. I was the company's first software librarian, where they actually kept records of what software they had and who used it, and it was very interesting kinds of just tidbits of how people even thought about software. They thought you would check it out and use it and then check it back in, like a library book. It was very interesting. They didn't know what to do with it either. So, and then I got married and decided to have kids and stayed home with kids for many years before I went back.
About how many years did you stay home, Jane?
I stayed home 14 years without a full-time job. I taught part-time at our local university and computing, intro computing. And it was different. I can't remember. It wasn't. I was a Fortran programmer, and you could do all of the assembly language stuff and whatever. But when I was there, I taught Pascal. I can't even remember what I taught now, but the programming languages of the day. I taught COBOL. But it's not hard to teach a programming language once you understand computing, because it's just different syntax. And so that was what was really the enlightening thing for me, was that it really isn't about syntax. It's really about how to solve the problem. And that's what was fun. And I enjoyed being around students, and so that motivated me to go back to school.
What did you like about programming or dealing with the computers? What was it that...
Remember, this is the days, the first computing courses I took, we had to use punch cards. We dropped them in a basket. A messenger came and took them someplace where they could be, the jobs would be run, and then they would bundle the paper up with their card deck and bring it back at a certain time. So back then it was really very labor-intensive. It was not instantaneous by any sense of this imagination. And then the nights before you had big projects, you went down to the computing facility and you laid on the floor and worked your card decks and whatever. But what I really liked about it was how cool it was to be able to solve a problem. How you could make a machine do something that you wanted an answer for. It was just I just thought it was really interesting how I could make something happen by telling it what to do. And it would give me the right answer that I couldn't necessarily know what the right answer was, but I knew how to get to the right answer. So I just thought it was really fascinating. And then the equipment kept getting better, and we got rid of card decks, and And I even used data back when I was working paper tape. I was in an environmental group where we would do studies for environmental impact statements. And so we had to a lot of times use weather data and try to decide population data, whatever, all on paper tape. So I'd actually have to go somewhere to have a paper tape read, and dealing with the broken tapes and all. I just thought the whole idea of being able to look at all that data and being able to try to making some sense out of it and being able to think about what that meant, that was just fascinating. It was just really interesting stuff.
Were there other people working with you that shared your interest? Were you like the other people?
Oh, yeah.
With what women?
Yes. In fact, well, I hate to say it, back then there weren't very many women, but there were probably 4 or 5 women in my group. And so it was really fun. We had a great time. We would work sometimes on projects together, but other times we would have independent projects. I know one of the men I most admired, and I still admire in my whole life, was a gentleman I worked with back in the old days when we used to flow chart. You give him a project, and he would spend 80-90% of his time working on a flow chart. He literally, day after day, would sit there and draw flow charts. Every single piece he would draw, and he'd refine it. I mean, he was very meticulous, and you'd go in there and you'd see him working, and he'd explain a problem to you or something. He was a very nice man. And at the end, he'd go in and he'd code it. He'd probably code the whole thing up in just a few days because he had his flow chart, and then he'd go run it, and it was unbelievable. It always ran. I mean, it was just one of those things that he had spent so much time analyzing the problem that he understood what the issue was, and then when he wrote the code, it was all there. I was just amazed. I was never that clear a thinker. He was really incredible, just really incredible thinker. So I'll never forget him.
Cool. So what you were teaching part-time?
Right, when my children...
This 14 years that your children were small? Or?
Probably not the first 2 or 3 years. Probably for, let's see, I went back to work... I probably taught for 10 years part-time. And it was fun, and the people in the department were really nice, and the chair of the department always said, I'll let you always pick the times you want to teach because I don't pay you anything. So I always taught when my children were in nursery school, so it wasn't like they were at a babysitter so I could teach. And then I would pick them up from nursery school after class let out, and then I would do my grading and lesson planning and everything when they went to bed at night. So, it was a really exciting time for me because I felt like I had it all. I felt like I was really doing some interesting work, and I loved college students, and I still had my babies, and I could still be the full-time mom that they thought I was. So it was a very nice life.
So what moved you on after the children were...
Well, when the children were in school, the youngest one was in 3rd grade, it got to the point where if you want to make... by this time, I really thought I liked college teaching, and I really wanted to be more engaged in understanding how to teach better in college, and I really liked the computing side of things. And so I said, all right, well, what am I going to do? Well, one of my colleagues at the school said, Jane, you're never going to get any respect unless you have a PhD. And he said, it doesn't matter that you're not, you're just as smart as you are when you finish, but it's a union card and you need it if you think you're serious. And so, reflecting on that, I thought, yeah, if I'm serious, I really need to do this. And fortunately, my husband was very supportive. He says, yeah, you want to go to school? Go to school. It's okay. Go to school. And so, I went back to school. I was fortunate enough that the University of Virginia is close by. It's only an hour. And I went over and I interviewed a bunch of the departments and talked to faculty over there to decide what I wanted to do.
Where were you teaching part-time?
James Madison University.
So you were in Virginia. You
Right,
left Illinois.
right. We left Illinois, 1980. So we were already in Virginia, and it was a blessing in disguise moving to the small town, because I got my job at the university based on somebody we had met in the neighborhood who taught there, who in that department, whose chair said, we need somebody to cover some of these intro classes. Do you know anybody? And he happened to say, oh yeah, I met somebody who just moved to town, and she's a stay-at-home mom. Maybe she'd be interested in doing it part-time. And that's what started all of this. I mean, I every time I get mad at things, I call Tony and go, Tony, it's all your fault. You make me do this. So, but I mean, he actually was really influential, without knowing it, on why I actually got my PhD. He opened the door to introducing me to something really fun.
So how did you choose the program? What program did you choose, and how did you choose it?
Okay, I went in. I went for a PhD instead of an EDD because of the same colleague who said, you don't get any respect with an EDD. You know. And he said, if you can do the PhD, you should do it. If you can't do the PhD but you still want to teach, then you do the EDD. And I thought, okay, well, the difference, at least at the University of Virginia, between those two degrees was whether you could do statistics. Well, that's, I said, well, this should be a no-brainer because math is easy. Math makes sense to me. So I said, okay, so I looked for a PhD program, and I actually looked in several different ways. I looked at a business PhD because I had taught in a business school in an MIS environment, and then I looked at a computer science degree, PhD, and then I looked at, it's out of the liberal arts school, but it's an education PhD, and they had what they called instructional technology, which really focused on classroom technologies. How do you use technologies to enable better teaching and learning? And that, I decided, was what I was more interested in versus the traditional CS and all the theory and algorithms and whatever courses you were. That wasn't really what I was interested in doing. I really wanted to teach. I was interested in learning about how people learn and how people should teach effectively. So I was able to merge those together, and this program was really great. I took some of the education courses, but I took a whole lot of the more MIS technical courses. I couldn't, for whatever reason, the engineering school was not as amenable to me taking courses, so I took all the database courses and, operating systems courses like that out of the business school. And then I took all the education courses out of the education school, and I graduated from the College of Liberal Arts. But it was a PhD, and that's how they ran the program. So my dissertation was on graphical user interfaces and whether they were better for teaching business interrelationships, whether students, if they could draw a concept, were able to grasp that concept better than having to actually put numbers into a simulation. So it took in both sides of what I wanted to do. You had to build a little something that allowed you to do graphical inputs. It was actually one of the first pen-based things that was around. It was just a toy that somebody had sent one of the faculty members, and he had always wanted to do something with it. It was back in 19...
You were in graduate school from 88 to 91?
Okay, so it was probably in 80, yeah. So back in 88, they had this little tablet, with a pen attached, and that's what we built, this little input device that allowed, and we could track students and how they made their motions, and they could actually, we built a little simulation where they could draw on it and do based on a number simulation, the graphical version of it. And so it was really interesting that now I've come around And my work at Microsoft is really about pen-based technology, which I'm just still in love with.
Yeah.
So.
Well, as you were going through graduate school, were there, you had mentioned the guy that convinced you to go to school. Were there other mentor relationships? Were there colleagues? Were you in a cohort of people going through graduate school?
It was an interesting time because many of the courses they were all graduate students, but they were graduate students in all different programs, so it was really an interesting place. You could take, some people were in the education programs, the courses I took, some of them were like in ed leadership or ed policy, and then when I would go over and take the computing type courses, they would be people who were getting, MIS degrees and whatever like that. So there were different groups of people that I hung out with. And yet both of them helped me figure out what I wanted to do as a dissertation topic. And on my committee, I had people from both sides. That they actually didn't know each other. And one of the comments I got from one of my advisors at the end was they really enjoyed being on my committee because they met people that had interesting perspectives on education, but they were more technical. But they were still really interested in how do you teach better and how do students learn better. So I felt that was a good thing. But one of the benefits of being an older student is that you really are more focused on your work. And I used to be a typical college student where I'd stay up all night before a paper was due. My dissertation was all the papers I did and all the research I did and all the work that was due in a class was always done at least 2 weeks ahead of time, which was so unlike my previous educational experience, and in part because I knew that my family always came first, and if I waited to the last minute to do the paper, there's somebody who's sick or somebody who needs something, and that would have to take precedence over my going to school. I mean, that was my choice, and I knew I never wanted to be put in a position where I had to make that choice. So I always tried to make sure that my work was done in plenty of time so that in the event that something happened that I couldn't work on my schoolwork, that I wasn't stuck.
So then you have your PhD in your hand.
Mm-hmm. And
how did you go about making the next set of decisions?
I actually got my PhD because I wanted to, not because I had any long-term job aspirations. My father had always thought that I could do it, and it was an opportunity, the door kind of opened that, I could go to UVA and do this, and then they offered me a fellowship, and I thought, well, this is really telling me I should go do this. And so I did it as an intellectual challenge. And my big fear in going to begin with was, what if I didn't finish? Because I'd never not finished things in my life. And my father was a very wise man. He said, there's no reason that you can't finish. But if you decide you don't want to finish, it's okay too. But you've done it. You'll never regret not trying it. He said, if you don't try it, you'll never know whether you could have done it. And so, I thought, okay, fine. But I was determined to finish it. And so I did it, and I finished it. And so I did it as an intellectual challenge, and it was really exciting, and I loved it. I mean, learning to learn is really a wonderful opportunity. And with my children in school, I had my days, and so I planned it so that my summers were where I did a lot of independent study work. My professors were wonderful. They understood that I had a family. They knew that I wanted to make progress, and so they allowed me the luxury of being able to do independent studies during the summer. I mean, I went over and visited with them, but there was not a daily or weekly obligation to be over there. So it was up to me to be self-directed in doing that.
Were they all male mentors?
Let's see. For the most part, I'm trying to think back. For the most part, yeah. For the most part, they were all male, both in the both in the education school and in the computing side. So, but they were more than willing to help me do things. To try to work with me to make sure I got what I needed. And so when I finished my degree, it was kind of like this big relief, and more that I had finished, and my father was still alive to see me do it. And so then I took a year off. I didn't look for a job. I mean, when I finished, I didn't look for a job. I was not, because I did not do it to find a job, I just kind of said, okay, I'm done. Now let's just take a deep breath and see what the next thing on the, is. And so after a year, well, it wasn't even quite a year, and I was thinking, well, I should go do something, I get a call from Anita Jones, who was chair at Virginia at the time. And she asked me to apply for this job. And she had heard about me because one of my fellow students, her husband, was a faculty member in the CS department, and so I had known, the wife told the husband about me and being a computing person and whatever, and so he had passed my name along as saying, well, here's the person who's a computing person but came out of the education school. This is the kind of person I think you're looking for this particular job. And so she called me and said, would you like to come in and talk about this job? And it was UVA had just been awarded a large amount of money from the National Science Foundation to be one of the schools to develop new curriculum for undergraduate computing. That was back in the days where, closed labs, which we take for granted now, were brand new. The idea of being more mathematically rigorous was brand new. All the kinds of things that the old curriculum, was now being thought about, and this is 15 years ago. And so they were charged with being one of the places to develop some new curriculum. So they needed an education person on board to help them both in the design and the assessment of this new curriculum. And what was wonderful about it is that they had departmental buy-in. The entire department agreed that this was a good thing to do. It wasn't just a couple of people in the department who had got the NSF award. Yeah, there were PIs, but the entire department bought in that this was the right thing to be doing, and every one of them was willing to take a piece of it. So from my perspective, coming in there, it was like this wonderful environment that everybody wanted to do what they could to make this project successful. There were lead people in certain categories in the CS1 and CS2, and then the software engineering part. There were people who were definitely leads, but there were people who were supporters and always supporting, saying, yeah, let me try that in my class, or can I help you do this? Or when we needed to do some testing in classrooms and whatever, I never had anybody turn me down when we wanted to get some baseline data, when we wanted to see what kids knew about a particular topic at the time. I never had anybody give me a hard time about, oh, God, here she is asking me that. They were always more than willing, and that's why I believe our project was pretty successful. NSF named us the flagship institution for this undergraduate curriculum development. So it was a wonderful opportunity to be there, and then I just stayed on and started teaching the core undergraduate intro courses, and I started doing a lot with another one of my soapboxes is really talking about literacy and what do students really need to understand about computing. And I think this is a failing in our group, in our community, that we haven't sold how cool it is and how important it is to others outside of our community. Anything that we touch today has some kind of computing in it, but yet we get no credit for it. We get no credit for the fact that cars are better, safer, stronger, and more intelligent than they ever were. People don't think of computing as being part of a car, but yet so much of a car is now computing. Engineers get credit, material science people get credit, all these other people get credit for developing better cars. Computer people don't get any credit for being part of that development. Bad thing. I think it's very bad. So as I moved on in my career, that was kind of one of the areas that I worked on at Virginia. Another one of the areas that I worked on while I was there was really getting students involved in undergraduate research, having them become community members of our department. I don't know, just all that kind of being in a university environment was just really wonderful. And I just stayed after after we finished our curriculum development stuff.
You touched on it a bit, but one of the set of semi-standard questions is, what's your teaching philosophy?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to elaborate just a bit on that? you've touched it tangentially, but
I think it's really interesting. One of the things I learned late in my teaching career was that if you really talk to your students early, it makes it a much easier environment to work with them. And so the last few years I taught, the first day of class, I would talk about my teaching philosophy and how I believed that we could work together to make the most of the class time and their time. And I really told them, I'm not here to teach you. I'm here to help you learn. And I said that I think those are very different things, because no matter how good a teacher I am, if you're not willing to learn, it doesn't matter. And learning takes effort on your part. Good students, my philosophy is that good students don't need teachers. We get in their way. But the students who need us are those who really want to learn something. And so we need to accommodate how they can learn versus just saying, this is what you need to know. And so I tried very often to do active learning things before I even understood what active learning was. I tried not to lecture even before I really understood that I really hate lecturing, and lecturing doesn't necessarily capture students' interests. You know, it was one of those things that I tried to reflect on how I like to learn things and what makes me happy when I finally get it, than standing there saying, I need to prepare my lecture notes for tomorrow's lecture. You know, that was the way I started out. I mean, I started out, I think, very traditionally the way we always did it in college. I would lecture to my students. I would do my notes. I would try to make good examples, but I lectured at them. And then I'd say, well, do you get this? Is it okay? And then, of course, what would they say? They'd say nothing. And it took me many years before I figured out how to engage them in a more active way. And I think that's a failing of all teaching, that we aren't helping people become better teachers. Because people are spending a lot of time getting ready for class, and I don't believe anybody spends that time deliberately to go do a bad job. And so, you know, the old stereotype, oh, well, you use the same notes from 10 years ago. I think there are very, very few people who do that. I find that an old wives' tale that has no credibility anymore. People who spend time in the classroom really do spend time getting ready. And so how do we enable them to become more effective? And that's more my teaching philosophy. It's really a partnership that if both sides aren't working at this, it's never going to work. One side can't make it work.
Okay, you really did that. Do you have a particular story that would illustrate this with a student that you can remember, or a class that you can remember?
It's a little bit different, but in my early years, I really tried to give good feedback to my students, especially on homework assignments. I was somebody who would read every line of their code and comment, even if it was the same comment on 100 papers, I would write that comment to try to help them understand that I really did care about how they wrote their code and whatever. And I had an incident where one young man turned in some code and then had the results. This is back when it was paper. Turned in, and I looked at it, and I looked at his code, and I said, this code doesn't work. And yet he turned in a set of answers that were the correct answers to the problem that needed to be solved. And as I looked more carefully, I noticed he turned in somebody else's answers. And so I was just devastated. I didn't know what to do. He had then violated the honor code. He had turned in somebody else's work as his own. And the person that whose work he turned in, I asked her, and she was a very good student, and there would be no reason for me to think she would need to cheat or do anything of that. And so when I talked with her and didn't say anything about this incident, I asked her, I said, well, how's it going? Did you get your work, or how's the lab getting when you go back and get your printouts and everything? She goes, it's really not a good system. People, they can't find them, so I have to rerun them. So I knew then that people were taking them, not necessarily just hers, but people were taking other people's work, and then I don't know whether the copying or whatever, but this student just took the answer sheet and put her answer sheet at the back of his work. And I debated for a long time on how to handle it, and he was never in class for me to even talk with him about this. So I had to do something. So my department chair said, you have to turn him into the honor council. So as the story goes, from what I heard from the honor council, was that when he was asked to appear, he didn't even know which class it was that he was being brought into honor council for violation. So obviously this young man was not ready to be a student, and he quit school and he left school. And when I heard that he left school, I was devastated, and I thought, oh my God, I've ruined this child's life. I've thrown him out of college. He's probably, what can he do with a half-finished degree? And I was just devastated that I had done this. But I had to say, well, this was the right thing to do. You can't go through life. And then 3 semesters later, I'm looking at my class roll. He's on my roll. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, no, he's back. And so I didn't know what to do, but the first day of class when I saw him, I approached him and I said, you've paid your penalty. We start all over. Brand new year, brand new course. You're going to do your work. We're going to be good. And he says, yes, ma'am, I've learned my lesson. And it turned out that he was kind of aimless. He didn't know what to do. He worked construction for a while, found out he really did want to go to college and get a better job, and he had to stay out of school. He was a fabulous student. He was a great student. I did watch carefully. I have to admit, I did watch his work very carefully because I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't being fooled. He did his, and at the end of the year, he wrote me a note that I still have. This is probably been close to 20 years ago, that he thanked me for giving him the respect that he didn't deserve. The way I handled him in class, the way, and I felt like I've done something to help this child get on the road to do the right thing in life. And so it just made me feel like this is what teaching is about. These are the things that we do to help students grow. And so I need to make sure that I understand how to help them be the most effective student that they can be, and how to help other teachers be the most effective teachers that they can be. So that's kind of where my soapbox stops.
Okay. Well, this is sort of a little bit different interview because you took a couple different paths.
Mm-hmm.
You clearly love teaching. You liked shaping the students' lives in that way, in the kind of teaching that you did. But then you've taken some other roads. Mm-hmm. Would you like to talk about?
Sure. As I was teaching and having this wonderful time at UVA, and because our curriculum was something that was sponsored by the National Science Foundation, it was obviously available to anybody who was interested, and we would share all of our class examples and our lecture slides and whatever. And I was the one who would kind of coordinate all of that and kind of help keep people on track. If they had questions, they would contact me. And I realized that there are a lot of people out there who are interested in finding out what people are doing and how computing is different from place to place, and what people are doing, what things, and what's interesting to people and what's not, and how they can improve their own school's information by looking at other people's. And so the opportunity came up to go to the National Science Foundation in the Division of Undergraduate Education, where I would be the program manager for computer science. And so I thought of this as an opportunity to kind of get out there and really try to make more computing people aware of what computing is going on across the country, across schools, across R1s to comprehensives to community colleges. I thought it was a really big opportunity for me to try to build more community within the computing world. And so I went up there, and it was a really wonderful experience. I would recommend that to anybody. I don't recommend that to anybody in their first few years of teaching, but certainly once you've taught for a while and you have built kind of what you believe, you have a philosophy on teaching, you feel confident about what makes you an effective teacher, and also understand that that doesn't necessarily work for everybody. So it was an opportunity to go up there and try to shape some of the programs and shape some of the thinking of the awards and who got awarded for what kinds of programs and whatever. So it was a really exciting opportunity and a wonderful 2 years.
At the same time, that's when you became quite active in professional societies.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk a little bit about the influence, any mentoring, anything about your, what types of things you did within professional societies?
Well, I was very fortunate when I first went to UVA that part of what they wanted me to do was become more engaged with professional societies. And so as far as going to SIGSI and going to Frontiers in Education or what these other education conferences, they were like, yes, you should be there. Yes, you should be writing for these. Yes, how can we help you do these? So from the beginning of our curriculum development all the way through, I was always encouraged to be very active within these communities. And so after you getting your first paper accepted to SIGSI is always a monumental experience. And being able to get up and present there, and then you start knowing people, and then you start looking forward each year to go and visiting some of these with these people again. And it's a very natural thing to then become active in an organization that you believe in the program, that you believe that they're doing good things by bringing all these folks together. And so I can't remember, I was asked to be program chair I can't remember what year it was, but program chair, and then I went on to being conference chair, and being able to implement some of the ideas that you think are important. One of the things that I'm most proud of is I introduced the idea of first-timers, getting first-timers together so that they became part of the community much quicker. It wasn't an original idea on my part. I was at another conference where they had an active first-timers program. It was a much larger conference. It was like 6,000 people. But I really felt like that was a great thing to do because then all of a sudden I had somebody to go to dinner with. All of a sudden I had a community of people to hang out with or to go to the next session with or to sit with and not be alone among 6,000 people for 2 days or 3 days. And so I thought this would be, SIGSI was a very warm and embracing community, but we had never done anything overtly to try to interact with this group. And as we got larger, I thought it would be harder to do. So, I started that when I was program chair. I did it again when I was conference chair. And then people must have thought it was a good idea because we're still doing it. And people have taken it to the next level of engagement and being part of actively seeking out the new people. And I think that's the kind of thing that makes me feel good about why I'm involved in these organizations that are about building community. Because that's what makes a community, is figuring out how we find each other and how we can then become better community, a stronger community, a community that shares and works together to do bigger and better things. So, those are the kinds of ideas that when people have them, I really hope that they will bring them up because I think there are communities who are very interested. Some people are afraid to, some communities aren't welcoming of that. But certainly the SIGSI community is very welcoming and open. I felt very warm the first time I went there. Some of my best friends are in that community. The reason I go to there now, not just to hear the papers, but is to see my friends and see how they're doing and see what's new. So it has served me well through these many years.
So you want to talk a bit now about your transition from academia and direct support for academia through NSF to another kind of support for academia, what you're doing now?
I never expected to go back to industry. I mean, obviously I was in industry before I had children, but I never really expected to go back there. I always thought I'd be in the academic world. And so my turn at NSF was just kind of, an interesting opportunity to learn more about the academic world. And I was literally back at my desk at UVA 5 weeks, and I got a call from Microsoft Research, and they said, gee, we're really interested in working with faculty in higher ed, and we need people who understand that space and who are interested in helping education understand how industry works. And would you be interested in this job? And I was just like blown away. I just never had thought about going to industry, never sought out a job in industry. And they made it sound so enticing that the deal was done like in 2 days. Yeah. I went home. I actually went home and told my husband about it, and I said, do you think they'll wait a year for me? I'd like to go back to the classroom, because that was what I missed at the National Science Foundation. I really missed the classroom. I missed the students. And he started laughing. He goes, you really are an academic. In the academic world, if you needed to postpone a semester or a year, the odds are you could do it if you have a good reason. He says, you think Microsoft is going to wait for you for a year? He said, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So, yeah, I didn't think so either. But so I took the job, and it was very exciting because they said, well, what do you think is what would you be interested in doing? And I identified tablet technology as something that I was really excited about. The story behind why I was excited about it is that they sent me this hardware before Christmas. I started in January. Sent me the hardware before Christmas, and I didn't have time to play with it. I just had it in a box sitting in the family room, and my children were playing with it. And I heard this yelling from the family room, Mom, Kevin's not sharing. It's my turn. And then, another one go, no, it's my turn. Dana's already had it for 2 hours. It's my turn now. It's my turn. And they were fighting over this. And my children are in their 20s fighting over this computer. And I finally went over to see what they were doing, and they were using the pen to do various things and trying to figure out how to use the pen with this tablet. And I'm like, wow, that's really kind of interesting stuff. So they were already showing me things that they had figured out how to do that were really interesting. And I thought to myself, wouldn't this be cool to use in a classroom? Wouldn't this be an opportunity to do different things that still do paper and pen things that we're so comfortable with, but yet allow technology to enable us to do more things like being able to search on it, being able to annotate, being able to put video in it, being able to do all of these, building a classroom environment that uses technology to make us feel comfortable in how we learn. Just a very different way of using technology. And I thought, okay, that's what I want to do. And at that point, there were no programs in tablet technology. Tablet was barely out, and there were very few applications and whatever. So I thought, okay, this is where I can step in. And what can we do in academia? What kinds of applications do we need to build in order to make this technology useful to computing and this technology useful in engineering? And so that for the past 3 years, that's the initiative I've led is tablet technologies in higher ed. First, looking at computing, then scope being more broad, understanding that this is a technology that is not a discipline-specific technology. We can build platforms on it that engage students in better learning. It's a platform that we can enable teachers to be better teachers. And so that has no content-specific orientation. The math teacher can do it as well as the physics teacher, as well as the English teacher. And so how do we build platforms and tools that allow teachers and students to be more effective? And that's where I've been excited for the last 3 years.
Cool.
Yeah,
really cool.
It's very cool.
You see the excitement on her face. We're going to we're getting to the sort of end of our interview.
Okay.
And not the very end. But can you identify some real challenges that you had through your career, balancing political challenges, gender challenges, ethnic challenges? What are the kind of challenges, children, family, anything that you can think of that were particular challenges? And how you overcame them or didn't?
Some of the early challenges were when I was new and didn't know how to be assertive in faculty meetings. It would be hard for you to believe now that I was actually very shy and retiring at one point in my life, but I truly was. And I didn't know how to be effective in addressing groups and making my point and being heard. And I don't know that it was because I was a woman or because I was new, but it was something. And I know what helped me was a couple of my colleagues that I would sit with, and I would say something, and then somebody would say it 5 minutes later, and everybody would jump on that and say, gosh, it's good. Well, then my colleague, one of my colleagues in particular, said, oh, yeah, that's what Jane said 10 minutes ago. And so he was the one who helped me stand up and say, yes, that's what I was talking about. And so I think a lot of it is confidence, and to know that you can think of things that are actually pretty good or that are worth discussing further. Not that everything you come up with is perfect, but it's opportunity to discuss and have value in an opinion of others about your ideas. And so I would encourage people, especially women, not to become really mean about it, but certainly if something you have said has come around, you should make sure you get credit for that, or at least partial credit. Always share the credit. There's plenty of credit to be shared, but make sure you're part of that credit. Even if you were the originator and had the best part of the idea, share that idea, saying, oh yeah, Mary and Sue and Bob and Harry, yeah, we came up with this. Because that's what gives you credibility. People start thinking, yeah, she's always on that group that comes up with those good ideas. That, to me, is how you build your credibility. Being a lone wolf, never, in my mind, is never a successful strategy. And it took me a lot of years to figure that out. You need to have people who have the same passions as you, different operating mode, different ideas, different thought patterns, but have the same passions. They're good people. They have good ideas. You work together, and you come up with some really fabulous things. Being able to work as a group is far more powerful than being able to work by yourself. So other things that industry is a very different game. I still have a hard time with it. They used to laugh at me when I first started at Microsoft, and they'd say, well, what's the ROI on it? I had to ask them what ROI stood for. That's return on investment. Well, so they said, well, what's the ROI on this activity? I'm like, well, it's a university activity. Our return on investment are our students. And so how do you document that? Well, in 10 years there'll be great programmers, or there'll be great developers, or there'll be great human beings. That's not the way business runs. Business runs under much more concrete, definitive things, and they don't want to wait 10 years. And that was one of my biggest that has been one of my biggest frustrations in industry, is that they need more quick action, more definitive actions that are deliverable. They need to know that this is working. But yet when you're on the research side of the house, you say, well, not everything can work all the time, and you need a certain percentage of failures in order to understand that you're pushing the envelope. Well, philosophically, everybody agrees with that. But practically, is that something that works in an industry environment? I don't think so. And so there's always this tension between being an academic and always being an academic. I will always view myself as an academic. Being an academic, but being in industry. And so how does that tension work? And it actually works in your favor if you don't get all bent out of shape over, this is really a stupid thing to be doing because it's not enough time, or this is really a question that why aren't academics addressing? So you don't get yourself tied up in knots over not being able to solve all of the problems of the academic industry engagement. But just keep working at it and keep pushing both sides to give a little. And then you get, and hopefully someday the hole in the dam will be big enough and the water will come out in bigger spurts. So,
well, do you have any outside interests that would help us know you a little bit better?
Oh, well, what I do in my spare time?
67 cookies.
Oh, I love to cook. I love to bake. Baking is one of my stress relievers, although I'm getting to the point now where I'm starting to eat my baking, which is a bad thing. But I love to bake, cookies especially. Christmas is a big time for me. That is when I stay up till 2 and 3 in the morning baking cookies. and get up the next morning at 7 a.m. and want to start again. I find that very relaxing. Chinese people don't bake, and so this is my gift to my family and to my friends, is that, I bake lots of cookies. I bake all sorts of cookies. I bake very time-intensive cookies, and I do it for love. And the other thing I like to do is I like to read cookbooks. Even if I never make a recipe out of it, I love to read cookbooks. I can almost start to taste something if I can read it. And I love to read murder mysteries. And because, again, I think it's because it's about a puzzle. It's trying to figure out what happened and how the clues fit together. And there are many mystery writers that are women, with women heroines. There are many mystery writers who actually have used culinary settings as part. So, you can wrap all of those into many different things. So, I love to read, I love to cook, and I love computing. And I love my family most of all.
Well, we should stop right there. That's too sweet. If you had, and you've done a bit of that, had some advice to give to a young woman just starting out in computing, and especially in computing education, what would that be?
Wow. I think you really have to decide you love being a teacher. And being a teacher meaning being a mentor, being a teacher meaning not being perfect, being a teacher not meaning not expecting your students to be perfect, but really trying to help people grow. I view teaching as being a mom. I think that all teachers, in the generic sense of being a mom, not in a gender sense, but the whole idea of nurturing, of letting them, pick what clothes they wear, whether it's the orange shirt with the red shorts to school 3 days in a row, but you wash them every night because you let them do that because that's part of growing up, that's part of their decision-making process, that's part of nurturing them into making the right decision. Same thing with teaching. The whole idea of having them think and being able to help them understand how to solve problems. And that's what a teacher does. And for a woman, I think it's not that unrelated to being a mom. I think women who are moms have almost an innate sense on why is the student having problems, or how do I deal with this difficult student? Because you know what? We've dealt with difficult children. We've dealt with difficult situations with our children. And we've all made a decision. We don't sit around and hem and haw as our child is laying in the middle of the grocery store out throwing a tantrum. We do action. Was it the right action? I don't know. But we made a decision, and the next time that happens, hopefully we have learned from how to deal with that action so that when that child does it again, we're going to help that child outgrow that. And I view that as very much of a teacher's role, being able to understand how that student thinks and enabling him or her to learn to outgrow whatever that problem is.
Cool. There's one last story that you'd like to say. This is Jane. Actually, you could tell us a travel story, because you haven't mentioned travel, but I've known you a while, and I may rephrase this sentence, but travel with your family is very important and makes you a whole person. You want to talk a little bit about
traveling? Well, I love to travel. That's one of the other things I love to do, and so this job is just like, godsend. I'll tell you, not a family travel story, but a travel story nonetheless.
Fine.
When you travel as much as I do, it's really a little scary when you start recognizing people on the plane. People that you sat next to, people that you've had conversations with, and they recognize you back. They're traveling also too much. Last week, coming out to Seattle, this woman yelled at me across the plane, "Jane, Jane!" And so I waved at her, and I kind of remembered sitting next to her on a flight some time back. And she came back and found me, and she said, and she shows me this piece of paper. She bought a tablet. And I said, "Wow, that's really cool." She goes, "Yeah, after you showed me yours, I had to go buy one. This is so..." And she is a management consultant.
Mhm.
She's a mother of 3 children. She travels too much, but yet she would. And I had shown her some of the cool things that kids could do on it, and whatever. She said she's already shown her kids the stuff, and now she has to fight her children to stay away from her business machine. and so it was just really funny that I thought, wow, I sold a tablet on the airplane.
That's cool. All right.
But again, it's about
That's
the technology.
Great. Good. Very good. Anything else you want to be sure you get down?
Life is good.
Great. Good.
Life is good. You should enjoy it while you can.
All right. Thank you.